The moment she walked out of that glass conference room, silence followed her like a shadow. 25 years of loyalty, erased with a smile from a man who thought ambition was perfume. They believed she'd leave quietly, that her work would remain theirs forever. But in a dusty envelope, buried beneath old notebooks, she held the clause they had forgotten, one sentence powerful enough to unravel a $550 million empire. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a reckoning. I knew something was wrong the moment Ethan Caldwell wouldn't look me in the eye. He sat across from me at the glass-walled conference table in Boston's Synertech Systems headquarters, his polished loafers crossed neatly under the chair. His jaw set in that smug MBA way that suggested he'd read a case study about this exact conversation. His cologne drifted faintly of citrus and steel, a scent too eager, too sharp, like ambition sprayed out of a bottle. I had walked into this performance review expecting the usual hollow pleasantries, a nod to my 25 years of loyalty, perhaps a handshake for steering Synertech through the rough patches. Instead, Ethan opened the folder in front of him like he was studying a menu, and what came out of his mouth wasn't a greeting. "Let's talk about alignment," he said. That word alignment landed like a verdict. I'd been at Synertech since the beginning, when we worked out of a creaky second-floor office above a pawn shop. Back then, alignment meant pushing folding desks together so the servers wouldn't collapse under their own heat. Alignment meant staying up through system crashes with my small team of bright-eyed engineers, fueling ourselves with vending machine coffee and half-burnt bagels. Alignment meant missing my sister's wedding because our load balancer failed mid-deployment. Now, alignment was corporate camouflage, a bloodless way of saying you don't fit anymore. Ethan adjusted his tie and smiled, but the smile never touched his eyes. "Caroline, you've done excellent work here." "Really? But Synertech is moving into a new era. We need people who are agile, adaptable. Fresh energy. Fresh energy." Translation: younger, cheaper, compliant. He flipped through the pages of my review without reading them, like an impatient diner skipping over entrees. "If you're not happy," he added, tapping the folder with one manicured finger, "the door is right there." For a moment, I felt nothing, no rage, no grief, just a stillness so deep it seemed to sink into my bones. My eyes wandered to the framed photo on the shelf behind him, my old team, back when Synertech was barely keeping the lights on. 3 of those engineers I'd hired straight out of college. I remembered mentoring them through botched updates, sitting shoulder to shoulder as screens flickered with error logs at 2 in the morning. I remembered defending them when management threatened to outsource, insisting their talent was the company's true backbone. And now here I was, treated like a line item in a quarterly expense report. Ethan slid a crisp envelope across the table. "Caroline Mitchell," he said, voice smooth as glass, "effective today, your position is terminated." The words hung between us, sterile and heavy. It wasn't performance. It wasn't misconduct. It wasn't even downsizing. It was the simple fact that I had been there too long, that my loyalty had become a liability in a culture addicted to disruption for disruption's sake. I closed my laptop softly, not with anger but with finality. No drama. No raised voice. No pleading. I stood, tucked the envelope under my arm, and left the conference room. Outside, the office buzzed with the artificial hum of productivity keyboards clattering, muted laughter from the design pod, the distant ring of a phone in sales. But as I walked past my team's desks, a hush fell. Eyes slid toward me, then darted away. No one spoke. No one stood up. That silence had a gravity to it, dragging respect, loyalty, history down with it. These were the people I had gone to battle for, the ones I had shielded from executives who saw them as expendable cogs. Now they sat frozen, pretending not to see me walk out with a termination folder clutched to my chest. At the elevator, I passed Marlene from HR, the same woman who once begged me to mentor her niece. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away. I almost laughed. In a place like Synertech, silence was safer than sympathy. The elevator doors slid shut, reflecting my face back at me, tired lines carved by years of late nights, eyes that had once burned with pride for this company. 25 years of my life had been built into its code, its infrastructure, its very DNA. And with a single smirk and a hollow phrase about alignment, Ethan Caldwell had dismissed it all. But as the elevator descended, that bone-deep stillness began to shift. Beneath it, something older stirred a memory, sharp as broken glass. At home that evening, I set the folder on the dining table untouched. My apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a calm refuge against the sterile brightness of corporate hallways. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass, the kind of ritual that steadied my hands. Then, without really deciding, I walked to the hallway closet. For years, I hadn't opened the top shelf. Dust had gathered over a banker's box labeled in my own handwriting, old IP/archived on touch. But tonight, I did. On the floor, cross-legged like I was back in grad school, I sifted through yellowed printouts and notebooks stained with coffee rings. Pages of code written in my younger hand fluttered like brittle leaves. My own annotation shortcuts, architecture diagrams, quick fixes scrawled in haste looked like relics from another lifetime. Then I found it. A slim brown envelope, edges still sharp, sealed with the original notary stamp. Inside lay the provisional patent application I had filed back in 2008 during one of Cinerteca's chaotic reshuffles when legal was too busy putting out fires to track intellectual property. At the time, a friend, a sharp-tongued IP lawyer, had told me, "Caroline, file it under your name. Just until things settle." Things never settled. I traced my finger over the header, filed by Caroline L. Mitchell. Not Cinertec. Not Ethan Caldwell. Mine. In the silence of my living room, the bourbon warming in my throat, I felt something shift again, not grief this time, but the faintest flicker of possibility. They thought they had cast me out, that I was expendable, irrelevant, a relic of an old era. But in my hands, I held something they had all forgotten. Something more powerful than any resignation speech, any outburst in a conference room. A weapon buried under years of dust and negligence. I closed the envelope, set it gently on the table, and looked out the window at the city lights burning against the night. Boston shimmered with glass towers full of men like Ethan, men who believed innovation was a cologne they could wear to board meetings. They had no idea what I had just unearthed. And for the first time that day, I smiled. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and buttered toast, the kind of place that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the 70s. Neon buzzed in the window above me, blinking open against the Cambridge night, and for the first time in hours I let myself sit still. I slid into a red vinyl booth with a chipped Formica table, ordered a black coffee I didn't need, and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. My laptop bag sat beside me, heavy with a brown envelope that seemed to hum with its own secret gravity. I wasn't here to eat. I was here to breathe. Cinertec had been my whole life. I had joined when we were just a handful of dreamers with nothing but a prototype and blind faith. I had poured 25 years of my time, my talent, my youth into that company, into the code that built it brick by digital brick. And Ethan Caldwell, fresh from business school, still smelling of ambition, had ended it with a smile that never touched his eyes. The bourbon I'd sipped at home earlier still burned faintly in my chest. It steadied me. But what steadied me more was the envelope, its edges sharp as a blade. I pulled it out, laid it flat on the table like contraband. The notary stamp from 2008 was faint but legible, a ghost of a decision made long ago. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. I hadn't looked at this document in years, hadn't thought I would ever need to. But tonight it felt like a fuse, waiting to be lit. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. "Long night," she muttered. I almost laughed. "Long lifetime." I turned the first page. The legal language was dense, but I knew the terrain. I'd walked this battlefield before. And then, there it was, buried like a landmine. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, full ownership rights shall revert to the original filer within 24 hours of notice. I froze. The words blurred, then sharpened again. Reversion. Automatic. Within 24 hours. And the original filer was me. The room seemed to tilt. Somewhere, a plate clattered in the kitchen, but all I could hear was the drumbeat of my own pulse. I remembered the day I filed it. Cinertec had been in chaos, investors threatening to pull out, Leadership reshuffling every other week. A friend of mine back then, Nick Alvarez, an IP attorney with a wry grin and a talent for spotting loopholes, had told me over greasy takeout cartons. Caroline, don't trust them. File it under your name. You can always assign it later when the company stabilizes. If it ever stabilizes. I'd laughed, chalking it up to paranoia, but I followed his advice. I had walked into a government office with trembling hands, signed my name on the dotted line, and left with a provisional patent application that felt like both a shield and a gamble. Then the years rolled on. Deals closed, funding rounds soared, leadership changed, and no one ever asked me about the patent again. The paperwork had simply vanished into the fog of corporate bureaucracy. Or so they thought. And now Ethan Caldwell, in his arrogance, had handed me the trigger. I leaned back in the booth, coffee bitter on my tongue. My hands itched to move, to do something with this revelation, but first I let myself drift back. I remembered that tiny second-floor office in Central Square, ceilings low enough to bump your head, walls lined with whiteboards scrawled in different colors of desperation. We were kids then, though we didn't know it, staying up all night, building and breaking, arguing and laughing, clinging to the belief that our lines of code could change the world. I remembered Brian, the intern I'd promoted to junior engineer, crying when his first commit crashed the staging server 2 hours before a client demo. I had sat beside him, typing furiously, whispering, "We'll fix it." We always do. And we had. I remembered defending the architecture when executives wanted to outsource, when they said offshore teams could replicate my work for half the cost. I had fought like hell, not for pride, but for my people, for the loyalty and brilliance that pulsed through every late-night line of code. And now, all of that loyalty, all of that history, had been brushed aside with one word: alignment. But here, in my hands, was something they had underestimated. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. The screen's glow painted my tired face blue. I scanned the document again, heart thrumming, and began drafting an encrypted email. To Nick Alvarez. Subject: need you to confirm a clause. I attached a scanned copy of the provisional filing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard and then I typed, "Still valid?" I stared at those 2 words for a long moment. The waitress passed again, dropping a bill with a smile I didn't return. Finally, I hit send. The diner was quiet, but inside me a storm was gathering. Hours later, back in my apartment, I paced the floor, the city lights bleeding through the blinds. My cat, Daisy, blinked at me from the couch as if she knew something cosmic had shifted. The bourbon glass on the table was half empty, but the adrenaline pumping through me was stronger than any drink. I checked my phone obsessively. Nothing. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. silence. 2 a.m. My heart sank with each empty buzz of a news alert that wasn't from Nick. I wondered if I had been naive, if the clause had expired, if Synerteca's army of lawyers had quietly buried it years ago. But then at 3:17 a.m., the screen lit up. Incoming call, Nick Alvarez. I answered on the first ring. Caroline. His voice was groggy but sharp. I could hear papers rustling, the faint clink of his reading glasses against a desk. Yes, I said. My voice cracked. I've read it 3 times, he continued. Caroline, it's valid. They fired you without cause, and the reversion triggered the moment you walked out of that building. The patent is yours. Entirely yours. Silence filled the line, heavy, electric. I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. Are you sure? Positive. Ironclad. Whoever drafted that clause did you a favor. Synertec has been licensing your framework all these years under a temporary arrangement. Without formal assignment, the moment they terminated you, he paused. They detonated their own foundation. A shiver ran through me, equal parts fear and exhilaration. Caroline, Nick said quietly, do you realize what you're holding? Their entire product line, their next launch, their investor deck, it all depends on your algorithm. And now, legally, it belongs to you. I closed my eyes. For the first time since Ethan's smug dismissal, tears pricked hot at the corners. Not tears of sorrow, tears of vindication, of release. They thought they had stripped me of everything. But in their arrogance, they had given me back the one thing that mattered most. When I hung up, I didn't pour another drink. I didn't rage or weep. I simply sat at my desk, the reversion clause glowing on my screen, and let the stillness settle into something harder. Resolve. They had fired me, but they had also freed me. And as the first light of dawn crept across the Boston skyline, I knew Cinerteca's empire was already crumbling, only they didn't see it yet. Because the architect they had dismissed still held the blueprints. And the fuse was already lit. Cinerteca's headquarters gleamed like a cathedral of glass and steel in downtown Boston. On the 32nd floor, the war room buzzed with the kind of manic energy only corporate theater could summon. Executives rehearsing buzzwords, assistants ferrying coffee, designers tweaking slides no one would remember. The Next Wave demo was 3 days away. To Ethan Caldwell, this was his coronation. He stood at the head of the polished oak conference table, sleeves rolled up, grin wide, selling his vision to the board as though he had personally coded every line. Ladies and gentlemen, this demo is going to redefine predictive infrastructure. Investors will salivate. Competitors will scramble. And when the press hits, Cinertec won't just be playing catch-up, we'll be leading the charge. Applause peppered the room. Not genuine, but cautious executives clapping just enough to keep their jobs. Ethan soaked it in, adjusting his cufflinks, believing himself a general on the eve of victory. Not once did he mention the woman who had built the very engine they were about to parade. Down the hall, the engineering team worked through the night. Servers hummed, monitors flickered with build logs, and developers whispered in low voices about the elephant no one acknowledged. Caroline Mitchell was gone. Fired. Erased. Yet her code remained the same architecture, the same algorithm pulsing beneath every flashy feature of Next Wave. They all knew it. They just pretended not to. And then, of course, came the intern. His name was Tyler Green, a 20-year-old summer recruit from MIT, eager to prove himself. He had been assigned one of those mindless tasks that corporations hand to interns like busywork: monitor USBTO updates for competitor filings. A checkbox on a project tracker, nothing more. Late one afternoon, hunched over his laptop with 3 different highlighters scattered across his notes, Tyler typed in Cinerteca's core patent number out of curiosity. Just routine. Just diligence. What flashed on the screen made his stomach drop. Owner, Caroline L. Mitchell. Effective date, 24 hours post-involuntary termination. Tyler blinked. Refreshed. Checked again. No mistake. The name was there, black and unmovable against the sterile white background. For a long moment he simply stared, his mouth dry, the highlighter frozen in his hand. Then his training or his fear kicked in. He drafted a cautious email, subject line trembling with understatement. Subject: possible issue with patent record. Body: noticed an update on USBTO listing for algorithm patent number 8774932. Ownership now reflects Caroline Mitchell, effective as of this week. Unsure if clerical error. Flagging just in case. He attached a screenshot, hit send, and leaned back, pulse hammering. Somewhere in his gut, he knew this wasn't a glitch. The email climbed its way through the hierarchy like smoke in a closed room. It landed first on a mid-level legal associate's desk, then on the desk of the deputy counsel, and finally hesitantly on Ethan Caldwell's inbox. Ethan skimmed it during his morning espresso, smirked, and rolled his eyes. Clerical error, he muttered, waving the printed email like a piece of lint when he passed it to his chief of staff. Tell legal not to panic. These government databases screw up all the time. But Ethan, the aide said cautiously, if it's true dash. It's not, he snapped, his voice slicing through the hallway. We are not derailing Next Wave over a typo. Understood. The aide nodded, lips pressed shut, and the matter was buried. But rumors are never buried long in a place like Cinertec. By that evening, whispers slithered through the engineering floor like static. Someone claimed the patent had switched hands. Someone else said Caroline had planned it all along. Slack messages buzzed in private channel, screenshots passed like contraband, hushed jokes that weren't jokes at all. Did you see this? Her name's on the filing. If it's real, we're in trouble. Shoo, don't talk about it here. Caroline's absence, once a silent wound, now throbbed like an open secret. She wasn't just gone, she might have taken the foundation of everything with her. Meanwhile, Ethan strutted through the corridors with the swagger of a man immune to gravity. He practiced his keynote in the mirror, rehearsing lines about innovation and synergy, believing himself untouchable. He had no time for whispers. He had investors to impress, slides to polish, handshakes to choreograph. In his mind, Caroline Mitchell was already a ghost, one more casualty of progress. But ghosts have a way of haunting. Across the city, I watched all of this unfold in silence. Emails trickled into my inbox, forwarded from friends who still believed in loyalty more than fear. Screenshots of my name plastered across USB records. Snippets of Slack conversations, clipped and encrypted. Tyler's flagged email, already dismissed as clerical error. I read them with a kind of grim serenity, sipping black coffee in the early hours. My cat purred at my side as though she sensed the storm. Inside me, emotions churned, anger, yes, but also vindication, and beneath it all, a cold patience. They were building a tower on sand. Every line of code they committed, every glossy slide they prepared for investors, every word Ethan rehearsed into a microphone, it all balanced on something they no longer owned. Something that belonged to me. And still, no one dared confront him. That was the part that stung the most. Not the arrogance of Ethan Caldwell, I expected that. Not the negligence of the board, they had never cared about the architecture, only the valuation. What stung was the silence of the people who knew better. The engineers I had mentored. The managers I had shielded. The colleagues who had once called me their firewall. They all saw the rope tightening around Synertech's neck, but none dared to speak aloud the truth. Fear had its own architecture, and Ethan had built it well. I set the brown envelope back into my safe, its edges still crisp, its weight still humming. I didn't need to rush. They were doing the work for me. Each day they ignored the truth. Each hour they marched toward the demo. They tied the noose tighter. And I would be there when it snapped shut. 3 days. 3 days until the next wave demo. 3 days until Ethan Caldwell stood on stage, chest puffed, eyes gleaming, ready to present my life's work as his legacy. 3 days until the silence became deafening. I leaned back in my chair, the city still flickering in the distance. They called it ignorance. I called it inevitability. And when ignorance collides with inevitability, only one word remains: reckoning. The Synertech auditorium glowed like a cathedral of ambition. Spotlights swept across polished concrete floors and glassy walls, where banners screamed "Next Wave is now." Rows of plush seats filled with venture capitalists, government liaisons, and journalists, all dressed in the sheen of expectation. The air was electric, the hum of whispered speculation blending with the faint click of phones. Backstage, Ethan Caldwell adjusted his navy suit jacket, the smile fixed on his face like armor. He rehearsed the line one last time under his breath: "Our proprietary engine will redefine the future." Proprietary. His favorite word. He rolled it across his tongue like a trophy. When the countdown clock on the LED wall hit 0, the house lights dimmed. A glossy promo video flashed across the 30-foot screen, robotic arms whirring, skyscrapers glinting, a parade of diverse actors smiling into touchscreen tablets. The audience applauded politely. Ethan stepped into the spotlight, his posture radiating confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice amplified and honeyed, "what you are about to see is the future of adaptive systems. Our proprietary engine dash." He stopped. A tall figure in a charcoal blazer had just stepped from the wings. It was Synertech's general counsel, Elaine Granger. Her heels clicked softly across the stage. To the audience, it looked like a planned cameo. But to Ethan, the color drained from her face was unmistakable. She leaned close. The microphone barely picked up her whisper, but the first row heard it clearly. "We don't own the patent anymore." Ethan blinked. Too long. Too visibly. He tried to laugh it off, turning back to the crowd. "A small technical hiccup. Folks, give us just a moment." But the audience had already stirred. Phones lit up. Fingers tapped. Within seconds, screens across the room pulled up the USB database. The patent number was right there on Synertech's own marketing slides. And beneath it, bold and undeniable: owner, Caroline L. Mitchell. Gasps rippled through the room like a storm rolling over water. An investor from Draper West Capital stood up, waving a printed sheet. "This isn't yours," she called. "The filing shows Caroline Mitchell as the owner, effective 3 days ago." Ethan's polished facade cracked. That's a clerical error," he stammered, sweat blooming at his temples. "We've always owned Dash." "No," Elaine cut in, voice sharp enough to slice through the static. "We never finalized the assignment." The reversion clause triggered automatically when Caroline was terminated. The words detonated in the auditorium. Silence thickened, jagged with realization. On the massive LED screen, the product UI froze mid-load, a mocking placeholder of ambition undone. From the back row, a solitary figure rose. Hal Brennan, the founder who had long retreated to Vermont with his scotch and regrets. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was indictment enough. Arms folded, eyes locked on Ethan, Hal radiated the kind of fury that didn't need volume. Ethan faltered, mumbling about unexpected reviews and minor delays. No one listened. Investors huddled together, whispering, their phones glowing with the same damning record. Reporters snapped photos, typing headlines before the demo even collapsed. Synertech loses patent to fired architect. On stage, Ethan's voice cracked. "We'll reschedule. We'll clarify Dash." But the demo was already dead. By the next morning, the boardroom reeked of stale air and panic. 12 directors sat around the polished oak table, faces grim, eyes fixed on the single page Elaine had laid before them. Per Section 9, Subclause D, she read, upon involuntary termination without cause, ownership rights revert to the original filer within 24 hours. That filer is Caroline Mitchell. Effective Tuesday. The silence was funereal. Ethan tried to rally. Tie loosened, collar damp, he leaned forward, fingers twitching over his laptop. "This isn't about legality, it's about perception." Caroline was disengaged, low energy. She wasn't adapting. The board approved the reorganization. This was a performance issue. Dash. Hal cut him off, his voice quiet but devastating. "You didn't just fire her, Caldwell. You fired the architect of our entire product line. And in doing so, you gave away the only thing this company actually owns." Ethan's mouth opened, closed. Sweat beaded. One of the directors rubbed his forehead. "So, what do we use now?" Elaine didn't blink. "Nothing. Without her consent, every build, every demo, every product tied to that algorithm is infringement. If we proceed, we face treble damages." Treble. The word sank like an anchor. Around the table, no one met Ethan's eyes. The CFO slipped off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. An investor rep muttered, "Jesus Christ." Synertech's empire, built on Caroline's blueprint, had collapsed overnight. Meanwhile, across the city, I sat at my kitchen table, morning light spilling across stacks of old notebooks and printouts. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls from unknown numbers, emails flagged as urgent, Slack messages from accounts already marked inactive. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened a new email draft. Subject, terms. The body was brief. Surgical. Full buyout rights for Synertech to relicense patent number 8774932. 8-figure royalty agreement, retroactive to date of termination. A seat on the board with full voting privileges, non-negotiable. I ended with one sentence. This is not revenge. This is realignment. No pleasantries. No signature. I hit send. Then I poured myself another coffee and watched the city blink awake beneath me. They accepted within 3 hours. All of it. There was no negotiation, no haggling. They were cornered animals, trapped by their own negligence, and I held the only exit. My terms were their survival. I let them wait a little before replying, just enough for sweat to bead on Ethan's perfect suit collar again. Then I sent a single follow-up, "I'll need a fresh badge," and returned my nameplate. It's in Caldwell's desk, second drawer down. He never threw it away. When the confirmation pinged back, I leaned into my chair, exhaustion giving way to something colder, cleaner. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not rage. Not even joy. What washed over me was stillness, the same bone-deep stillness I had felt when Ethan slid that termination folder across the table. But now the stillness wasn't surrender. It was control. I had been erased, dismissed, reduced to legacy overhead. But with one clause buried in legalese, I had turned their empire inside out. Never underestimate the architect. Some of us don't burn bridges. We build empires. And we charge rent. The city was quiet when it was all over. Not the silence of defeat, but the kind that follows a storm. The streets washed clean, the air sharper, the horizon clearer. Caroline Mitchell sat at her window, the sun spilling across the skyline, her coffee cooling in her hand. She didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. The victory was already etched into something far more permanent, the simple, immovable truth that when you fire the architect, you risk losing the foundation. And that, perhaps, is the lesson we all tend to forget. The world often mistakes quiet competence for weakness. It glorifies the loudest voice in the room, the smoothest smile, the one who knows the right jargon to say at the right time. But real power is rarely loud. It's built in the shadows, line by line, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice, until one day, it's the only thing holding the walls upright. Caroline's story isn't just about revenge or even justice. It's about remembering your worth when others have forgotten it. It's about the foresight to protect what you've built, even when no one is watching. It's about patience, sitting in stillness while the world underestimates you, until that stillness becomes resolve. How many of us have been dismissed? How many of us have been told we're replaceable, that our years of loyalty or nights of sacrifice mean little in the face of someone else's spreadsheet? Caroline reminds us that our value doesn't vanish because someone fails to recognize it. Sometimes it only grows stronger in the silence, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. So maybe the real takeaway isn't just to fight louder, but to prepare smarter. To plant clauses in our lives, in our choices, that safeguard the work of our hands and the integrity of our souls. Because one day, when arrogance comes knocking, those quiet decisions may be the very thing that turns the tide. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever sat across from someone who looked at you like a line item instead of a human being, you know how much this matters. You know what it feels like to carry that silence, and what it means to finally break it on your own terms. If Caroline's story struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear it. Share your thoughts below. Tell us your own story of resilience, of the moment you remembered your worth. And if you want more stories like this, stories of grit, of strategy, of the quiet victories that reshape entire empires, make sure you're here for the next one. Because sometimes the most powerful moves aren't the loudest. They're the ones made in silence, until the whole world feels the echo.